She gave 32 years of her life to other people, and she gave them gladly. There was no bitterness in it. There was no secret resentment building beneath the surface. No quiet fury she was suppressing for the sake of keeping the peace. She chose every sacrifice she ever made. She chose them with open eyes and an open heart. And for a long time, for most of her life, really, she believed that choosing to give was the same thing as living well. Her name was Angela Brooks. She was 57 years old. She had been married to the same man for 32 years. She had raised 3 children, buried 2 parents, held together a household through illness and financial strain and the ordinary grinding difficulties that were most families down. She had done all of it with grace. She had done all of it without complaint. And on a Tuesday morning in February, standing alone in a kitchen that had once overflowed with noise and need and the beautiful chaos of a family being built, Angela Brooks looked around at the silence and asked herself the one question she had never thought to ask before. Who am I? That was the question. Just 3 words. And the fact that she could not answer them, that she stood there in her own kitchen, in her own life, after 32 years of building something she had believed in completely, and could not answer 3 simple words, was the most frightening thing that had ever happened to her. Not frightening in the way that illness is frightening, or loss, or the kind of sudden disaster that announces itself loudly and gives you something concrete to fight. This was a different kind of fear, the quiet kind, the kind that creeps in through the back door while you're busy being needed, the kind that sits down at your table and waits, patiently, for the moment when the noise finally stops and the children are gone and the husband is in another room and there is nothing left to do, and then looks you directly in the eye and asks you to account for yourself. Angela had no account to give. She did not know, in that moment, what was hers, what had always been hers, what remained. She stood there for a long time, long enough for the coffee to grow cold, long enough for the morning light to move across the kitchen floor in the way it always had, indifferent to her stillness, indifferent to the particular quality of her confusion. She had stood in that kitchen 10,000 times. She had made 10,000 meals in it, had held crying children against her chest in it, had argued and reconciled and laughed and worried and hoped in it. The kitchen knew her. Every corner of that house knew her. And yet she felt, standing there on that February morning, like a stranger in a place she had lived her entire adult life. That feeling, the specific hollow sensation of being a stranger inside your own existence, is what this story is about. It is not a story about a bad marriage. It is not a story about a cruel husband or ungrateful children or a life that went wrong in any of the obvious ways. It is a story about something quieter and in many ways more dangerous than any of those things. It is a story about what happens when a woman mistakes being needed for being whole. What happens when she builds her entire sense of self around her usefulness to other people. And then one day, not because anyone abandoned her, not because anyone failed her, but simply because life moved forward the way life always does, the people she organized her identity around no longer need her in the same way. The children grew up. The husband became self-sufficient. The parents passed. The community found other capable hands to do the work she had always done. And the woman who had spent 3 decades being the answer to everyone else's questions was left, at 57 years old, unable to answer the most basic question of all. Before we go any further into Angela's story, and I want to warn you now that this story does not stay in the dark, that it earns its way towards something real and good and worth staying for. I need you to understand something. What happened to Angela is not unusual. What happened to Angela is happening right now to millions of women in kitchens exactly like hers, in silences exactly like that one. You might already be thinking you know where this is going. You might be assuming that this is a story about a man who took too much and gave too little, a marriage that quietly curdled over 3 decades while everyone pretended not to notice, a woman who finally, at 57, woke up and walked away. That is a story worth telling. But it is not this one. This story is harder than that in some ways and more hopeful than that in others. Because the truth of what happened to Angela cannot be placed at anyone's feet except, eventually, her own. Not in a cruel way, Not in the way we sometimes use personal responsibility as a weapon against people who are already suffering, but in the way that genuine understanding is always, ultimately, about returning power to the person who lost it. And Angela had lost something. She had lost the most essential thing a person can lose. She had lost the thread that connects you to yourself. The good news, and I'm telling you this now because I want you to stay, because I want you to hear the whole of it, is that threads can be found again, even after 30 years, even at 57. Here is what Angela's story is really about. It is about the particular danger of a virtue that goes too far. Angela was not selfish. She was not lazy. She was not the kind of woman who shirked her responsibilities or looked for easy exits. She was, by every measure that the world tends to use, an extraordinary woman. Devoted, dependable, generous to a degree that most people only manage in their best moments, and she managed as a way of life. The mistake she made was not in any of the choices she made individually. It was in the pattern those choices created over time. It was in the way that generosity, practiced without any corresponding attention to one's own needs and identity, can slowly hollow a person out from the inside. It is possible to love your family completely and still lose yourself in the loving. It is possible to give everything and still have something left that was worth protecting. The tragedy of Angela's story is not that she loved too much. The tragedy is that she never learned that loving well and disappearing into the loving were two entirely different things, and that only one of them was ever asked of her. Before we continue with Angela's story, take a moment to let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We hear from women all over the world on this channel, and every single comment reminds us why stories like this one matter. If you are new here and this is already speaking to something you recognize in yourself or in someone you love, please hit the subscribe button now so you never miss what we share next. This community exists because of women who are brave enough to say, "I see myself in this story." Be one of those women today. Angela Carter was 22 years old when she met David Brooks at a church fundraiser in the spring of 1989. She was finishing her undergraduate degree in education. She had plans, a graduate program she had been accepted to, a career in school counseling she had been quietly designing since her sophomore year, a clear and specific vision of the woman she intended to become. She was the kind of young woman who made lists and followed through on them. The kind who arrived early and stayed late. The kind who had, at 22, more discipline and purposefulness than most people develop in a lifetime. She was also, from the moment she met David, completely in love. That matters because what came next was never a surrender. It was a series of choices made by a woman who was fully present, fully awake, and deeply certain that the life she was building with this man was worth whatever adjustments it required. The adjustments at first seemed small, the kind that any two people make when they decide to build something together. David was offered a job in another city 6 months after they married. It was a good opportunity, the kind that comes once and does not come again, and they both knew it. Angela had already deferred her graduate program by a semester because the wedding had consumed more of the spring than she had planned for. Deferring it again for a move that would give them a solid financial foundation seemed not only reasonable but obvious. She told herself there would be time. She told herself that a year's delay was nothing in the span of a whole life. She told herself, and this is important because it is the first time she told herself this particular lie, the lie that would become the most repeated sentence of her internal life. She told herself that she would get back to it. She would get back to the program. She would get back to the career. She would get back to the woman she had been before David's opportunity arrived and rearranged everything. She was 23 years old. She had no reason not to believe herself. There was so much time. She was certain all the time in the world. Marcus was born 14 months after the move. He arrived early and hungrily, demanding everything, the way first children tend to. Angela had been planning to enroll in the graduate program that fall. Instead, she spent the fall learning to be a mother, which is its own graduate program. One that nobody tells you is the hardest thing you will ever do, and one for which there is no degree at the end, no credential, no official acknowledgement of the extraordinary amount of yourself that it consumes. She loved Marcus with a ferocity that surprised her. She had expected to love her child. She had not expected the specific violence of it, the way it rewired something fundamental in her chest, the way she would lie awake at night, simply listening to him breathe, because the alternative, not listening, not watching, not standing guard over this small, impossible creature she had made, was unthinkable. She did not resent him for the deferral. She resented nothing. She simply loved him, and loving him meant everything else could wait. And so everything else waited, and she did not think much about it, because there was no time to think, and there would be time later. Diane arrived 2 years after Marcus. James, the youngest, the one Angela would later say taught her more about fear and love than any experience of her life, came 3 years after Diane, and came early, spending his first weeks in a neonatal unit, while Angela slept in a chair beside his incubator and David drove back and forth between the hospital and home, trying to keep Marcus and Diane's lives as normal as possible. James survived. He did more than survive. He grew into the kind of stubborn, laughing, infuriating child who seems to have arrived in the world with a particular agenda and no patience for anyone who gets in its way. Angela adored him. She adored all 3 of them. She had given up the graduate program by then, not with any formal announcement, not with grief or ceremony, but simply by continuing to defer it until deferral became abandonment and abandonment became the new normal. The woman who had once made lists and followed through on them was now making different lists. Grocery lists, school supply lists, lists of medications and pediatrician appointments and permission slips. She was magnificent at all of it. By the time the children were in school, Angela had built something that anyone looking at from the outside would have recognized immediately as a success. The house was warm and well-run. The children were healthy and loved and doing well. David had continued to advance in his career, in part because Angela had made it possible for him to devote his full attention to it, a contribution that was real and significant and almost entirely invisible in the way that women's domestic labor tends to be invisible. Not because anyone was deliberately ignoring it, but because it worked so well that it required no acknowledgement. Things that work tend to be taken for granted. Angela worked. She was taken for granted. She did not, at that stage, particularly mind. She had a life full of purpose and connection. She was needed constantly and completely. She was, in the vocabulary of her community, her church, her neighbors, the other mothers at the school, a woman to be admired. Dependable, selfless, caring. These words were offered to her as gifts, and she received them as gifts, and for a long time they felt like enough. There is something seductive about being needed, something that can feel, if you are not careful, very much like love. When someone cannot manage without you, when your presence is the thing that holds a household together, when your attention is the thing that makes the children feel safe, when your availability is the thing that allows your husband to function at his best, there's a warmth in that, a sense of importance, a daily, concrete proof that you matter. The danger, and this is the danger that nobody warned Angela about, that nobody warns most women about, is that over time, if you're not careful, being needed can become the whole of your identity. Not part of it, not an important part of it, the whole. You stop being a person who is also a mother, also a wife, also a woman with her own desires and interests and ambitions. You become, instead, simply the person that everyone else needs. And that works. It works beautifully. It sustains entire families and communities, right up until the moment it stops working. Right up until the moment the children don't need you anymore, and the question of who you are without them is suddenly, devastatingly, not a philosophical exercise, but an urgent, practical emergency. Marcus left for college on a Saturday in late August, and Angela was fine. She was genuinely, determinedly fine. She had packed his bags with her. She had driven him to the airport. She had hugged him for a long time in the departures hall and told him she was proud of him and meant every word of it. She cried in the car on the way home, but she had expected to cry, had prepared herself for it, had told herself that this was the job. Raising children who were capable of leaving, raising children who were ready for the world, raising children who did not need her in the same desperate way they once had was the whole point, and it was a point worth celebrating. She celebrated it. She made David a nice dinner that night, and they talked about Marcus and laughed about Marcus, and she felt, genuinely, that she was handling it well. The house was quieter with one fewer person in it. She noticed the quiet. She did not yet understand it. She told herself she was fine, and she was for now. For now, she still had Diane and James at home. There was still a great deal of needing to be done. She was still, in every meaningful sense, necessary. Diane left 2 years later, and James the year after that, and the departure of each one took something with it that Angela was not able to name at the time, but that she felt with a precision that she could not quite justify to anyone, including herself. It was not grief, exactly. It was not depression. It was something more like the sensation of a load-bearing wall being quietly removed from a structure that has depended on it for so long that the structure itself has forgotten how to stand without it. She still had David. She still had her community, her church, her commitments. She still had a household to manage and meals to cook and 1,000 small domestic tasks that she had performed so long and so automatically that they had become something like a language. The language she used to express her love, to make her presence felt, to justify, in some deep unconscious way, her place in the life she had built. But the people those tasks had been performed for were mostly gone now. And performing them for an audience of one, for a husband who was perfectly capable of feeding himself, who had developed over the years a set of work habits and personal routines that insulated him, not unkindly but completely, from needing her in any urgent way, felt different, felt smaller, felt like maintenance rather than meaning. David was not a bad husband. That needs to be said clearly and without qualification, because what follows might make it easy to cast him as one, and he was not. He was a good man who had been, over the course of 30 years, allowed to become somewhat less present than he might otherwise have been, allowed, in large part, by Angela's extraordinary competence, which had made his presence less necessary in the practical management of their shared life. He showed up. He provided. He was faithful and decent and, in his way, deeply devoted to his family. He was also, by the time the children left, someone Angela had grown alongside rather than with. Two people who had built a life so completely organized around the needs of others that when the others left, they looked at each other across the kitchen table and realized, with a quiet shock that neither of them quite knew how to address, that they had not spent much time in recent years figuring out who they were to each other apart from those children. They had been so busy being parents, so consumed by the beautiful and exhausting project of raising 3 people, that they had largely stopped being people to each other in any new or exploratory way. The marriage was real, but it was also, in certain essential respects, a habit. Angela was still loved. She knew she was still loved. She did not doubt that David loved her, did not doubt that her children loved her, did not doubt that the community of women she had built around herself at the church regarded her with genuine warmth and respect. And yet, there was a loneliness that settled into the house after James drove away that she could not explain to anyone, including herself. She tried, once, to explain it to David. She sat down at the kitchen table and said that she had been feeling strange lately, disconnected somehow, like something fundamental was missing, though she could not identify what. He listened carefully. He took her hand. He said, "But you seem fine." And she nodded because she had no language for what she was feeling that would make it make sense to him. And because he was right, in a way, she was performing fine with great skill, and if fine was what the performance produced, then fine was what she had to work with. She went back to the kitchen. She made dinner. She did the dishes. She sat on the couch beside her husband and watched television and felt, with a clarity that was almost physical, that she was present in the room and absent from herself at the same time. The loneliness she was experiencing is not an unusual experience for women in this season of life, but it is an unusually difficult one to explain because it resists the categories we have available for it. It is not loneliness in the way that widows are lonely or in the way that socially isolated people are lonely. Angela was surrounded by people. She was loved. She was not alone in any of the standard senses. What she was experiencing was something more specific and more insidious. The loneliness of a person who has made herself so thoroughly available to others that she has become opaque to herself. She had spent so many years being what everyone else needed her to be that she had lost track of what she was when nobody needed anything. She had no practice at it. She had no vocabulary for it. The self that exists apart from its usefulness to others. The self that wants and enjoys and prefers and pursues things simply because it finds them good had been, not deliberately but effectively, put aside for so long that it had become a stranger. And the strangest part of all, the part that would take Angela the longest time to come to terms with, was the realization that nobody had done this to her. She had done it to herself, one small generous choice at a time, over 30 years. It happened on a Thursday morning in February, 8 months after James had left for his new apartment 3 states away. Angela was standing at the bathroom mirror. She was not rushing. There was no longer anything to rush for. The school run was a memory. The early departures and packed lunches and permission slips and sport schedules that had organized her mornings for 20 years were gone, replaced by a quiet that she had not yet learned to inhabit. She was standing at the mirror doing nothing in particular, not getting ready for anywhere, not preparing for anyone, and she was looking at her face, her real face, the one beneath the performance of competence and warmth and endless capability that she put on every morning the way other women put on makeup. And the woman looking back at her was someone she did not quite recognize. Not because she had aged, though she had. Not because she was physically unfamiliar, though there was something in the eyes she could not account for. But because she could not, in that moment, answer the simplest question about the person in the mirror. She did not know what that woman wanted. She did not know what that woman enjoyed. She did not know who that woman was when nobody was asking anything of her. The question rose up before she could stop it. Who are you? Not. Who do you belong to? Not. Who needs you? Not. Who would miss you, or depend on you, or be diminished without you? Who are you for yourself, by yourself, in the private interior of your own experience? Who are you? Angela stood at that mirror for a long time. She stood there until the light shifted and her coffee went cold, and the house moved through its ordinary Tuesday sound around her while she remained still at the center of it, trying to locate something she was increasingly afraid she had lost. The experience was not dramatic in the way of breakdowns and revelations in films. There was no single moment of collapse. There was only a long, terrible, clarifying silence in which she understood, with a certainty she could not undo, that she had arrived at the middle of her life without herself. She had been so busy giving that she had forgotten to keep anything. She had been so focused on being what everyone else needed that she had never asked, not once, not seriously, what she needed, what she wanted, what, stripped of all obligation and role and the comfortable architecture of being needed, what she actually was. The question did not have an answer. That was the crisis. The weeks that followed the mirror moment were, by Angela's own later account, the most disorienting of her life. Not the most painful. She had known more acute pain in the years of her parents' illness and James's early weeks in the hospital. But the most disorienting. She went through her days performing all the functions she had always performed. Cooking, cleaning, attending church, volunteering, showing up for the people who called on her. But she was doing it now with an awareness she had never had before. An awareness of the automaticity of it, of the way she had organized her entire existence around responding to other people's needs for so long that response had become reflex, and reflex had become identity, and identity had become a cage she had built herself out of the best materials she had and entered willingly and lived in for 30 years without ever noticing the bars. She was not angry. She wanted to be angry. Anger would have been something to hold on to, something to orient herself by. But she was not angry. She was bewildered. And beneath the bewilderment, quietly and insistently, was a grief she had not yet given herself permission to feel. She was grieving the graduate program she never returned to, the career she had set aside and never picked back up, the woman she had been at 22 who had believed in her own ambitions with a clarity and confidence that she could no longer access. She was grieving the friendships she had let drift because she was always too busy, the interests she had quietly set aside because they did not serve any practical purpose in the life she was maintaining, the version of herself that had existed before she became so thoroughly the person that everyone else needed. She had not experienced any of these losses as losses when they were happening. They had seemed, at the time, like reasonable adjustments, the ordinary negotiations of a woman building a family, making the trade-offs that were required, accepting that some things would have to wait. But they had not waited. They had died quietly while she was busy elsewhere, and she had not attended the funeral of any of them because she had not known there was a funeral to attend. The grief was not about blaming anyone. It was about acknowledging that something had been lost, that she had been lost, and that the losing had happened so gradually, so gently, so completely without malice, that she had not noticed it was happening until the morning she looked in the mirror and could not find herself. We need to pause here for a moment, because what Angela discovered at that mirror, the realization that she had been quietly disappearing from her own life for years, is something that resonates deeply with so many of the women who watch this channel. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever arrived at a moment in your life where you realized that you had been so devoted to caring for others that you had lost track of who you were for yourself? We want to hear from you in the comments. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do that now. There's so much more of Angela's story still to come, and I promise you it is worth staying for. The breakdown, when it finally came, did not look the way Angela had imagined breakdowns looked. She had imagined, on the rare occasion she had allowed herself to imagine such a thing, that a breakdown would be loud, dramatic, that would involve sobbing on the bathroom floor, or lying in bed unable to move, or some other visible, unmistakable signal that a person had reached the limit of what they could carry. Her breakdown was quiet. It was, in its own way, characteristic of her, orderly, private, managed with the same competence she brought to everything else. She cried in her car. She did it in the parking lot of the grocery store on a Wednesday afternoon, after a phone call with Marcus that had been warm and brief and entirely about his life, as phone calls with adult children tend to be. She had hung up and sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes, crying in a way she had not cried since James's early weeks in the hospital. It was not because Marcus had done anything wrong. It was because she realized, sitting in that car in that parking lot with the groceries in the back seat, that she had no idea what her own life was for anymore. She had spent 30 years being the infrastructure of other people's lives, the person who made it possible for her husband to work, her children to grow, her community to function. She had been indispensable. She had been valued, genuinely valued. She did not doubt that, in exactly the way that infrastructure tends to be valued, which is to say thoroughly and invisibly, the way we value clean water or reliable electricity, things whose presence we take entirely for granted and whose absence we would experience as catastrophe. But infrastructure is not a self. And Angela, sitting in that parking lot, understood for the first time in 30 years that she had confused the two. She had allowed being needed to be the same thing as being a person. She had let her usefulness stand in for her identity. And now that the scale of the needing had contracted, now that the children were grown and David was self-sufficient and the community had other capable hands, she was facing the terrifying question of who she was when she was not being used. The answer, she was beginning to suspect, was that she did not know. She had not maintained herself separately from her roles. There was nothing in reserve. She told Diane. She is not sure, even now, exactly why she told Diane rather than anyone else. Perhaps because Diane had her mother's eyes and a quality of attention that Angela had always found unusually trustworthy, or perhaps simply because Diane called on the right day, when the parking lot crying had been followed by 3 days of a gray, flat numbness that Angela did not have the vocabulary to name, but that frightened her in its completeness. She told Diane that she was struggling, that she felt lost, that she did not know who she was outside of being a mother and a wife, and she thought perhaps she needed to talk to someone about it. Diane, to her credit, did not minimize it. She did not say, "Mom, you're fine. You're just adjusting to the empty nest. Everyone goes through this. Give it a few months." She said, "Mom, I think that sounds really brave to admit. I think you should talk to someone. I can help you find someone if you want. And Angela, who had spent her entire adult life being the person other people leaned on, who had no experience of asking for help and very little practice at receiving it, said yes. That yes, quiet and embarrassed, and accompanied by the specific discomfort of a woman who has never allowed herself to be cared for, was the first step toward the rest of her life. The therapist's name was Dr. Carol James. She was in her early 60s, unhurried in the way of someone who has heard many things and found none of them surprising, with an office full of plants and the kind of deliberate quiet that seemed specifically designed to make it easier to say true things. Angela was, in their first session, extremely fine. She sat in the chair across from Dr. James and explained her situation clearly and competently, in the organized and articulate way she had always communicated, and she described her feelings with the same careful precision she brought to everything. And she looked, even to herself, remarkably together for a woman who had been crying in parking lots 3 times a week. Dr. James listened without interruption. When Angela finished, there was a pause that lasted longer than Angela was comfortable with, and then Dr. James asked a single question. The question was this: Angela, what do you enjoy doing when nobody needs anything from you? Angela opened her mouth to answer, and then she closed it, and then she looked at her hands, and then she looked at the window. And the silence that followed was not the comfortable silence of a woman who has so many answers she is simply choosing between them. It was the terrible silence of a woman who has no answer at all. The silence lasted almost a full minute. Dr. James led it. Angela would later say that that minute was one of the most important of her life, not because of anything that was said in it, but because of what it revealed. In 57 years of living, she could not immediately name a single thing she did for herself. Not a hobby, not a practice, not an interest, not a pleasure that belonged to her alone and existed purely for its own sake, rather than in service of someone else's need. She had been so completely organized around her usefulness that the question of what she enjoyed, what she, Angela, wanted and liked and found meaningful when nobody was asking anything of her, had no ready answer. It was not that she had no inner life. She had a rich interior, a depth of observation and feeling and perception that she had simply never had the occasion to cultivate in any systematic way, because the occasion for it had never arrived, and she had never made the occasion herself. After the silence, she said quietly, "I used to paint." It was the first genuinely personal thing she had said in that office, and possibly in many years. Dr. James wrote something in her notebook, and for the first time since February, Angela felt something tentatively approaching hope. Recovery, and it was a kind of recovery, though not from illness in any conventional sense, did not happen quickly or neatly. Angela had not expected it to. She was a practical woman. She understood that 30 years of a pattern do not unravel in a month of therapy, that identity, once given away in increments, must be rebuilt in increments, that the work of becoming yourself again after a long absence is patient and slow and sometimes discouraging. She made a list. It was characteristically a very organized list. On it, she wrote all the things she had once enjoyed and set aside. Painting, which she had loved in college and not practiced in 20 years. Reading, the real kind, the slow, unhurried kind, not the 10 minutes before sleep that was all she had managed for decades. Walking, without a destination or a purpose, purely for the pleasure of movement and air. She added things she had always been curious about and had never pursued. A pottery class she had seen advertised at the community center. A book group that met on Thursday evenings at the library. A mentoring program for young women at the college 2 miles from her house that she had driven past 100 times and never stopped at. She began the walks first because they required nothing, no enrollment, no materials, no commitment beyond showing up. She walked every morning for 40 minutes before David woke up, in the particular quiet of early mornings that she had always loved and never allowed herself to simply inhabit before. She had walked before, of course. She had spent years walking the children to school, walking the dog, walking the neighborhood in the way of someone who was getting from one necessary thing to another. But this was different. This was walking with no destination and no purpose beyond the walk itself. No task waiting at the end of it. No one who needed her to return by a certain time. It was extraordinary, the first few mornings, how strange it felt to do something that was entirely and only for herself. She felt guilty, vaguely. She felt selfish, vaguely. She kept waiting for the discomfort to become overwhelming and send her back inside to find something useful to do. It didn't. It eased slowly over the first 2 weeks, and somewhere in the third week, she realized that she had started to look forward to it, that the 40 minutes belonged to her, that she had claimed them, that claiming something for yourself after so long felt, and this surprised her, very much like freedom. The watercolor class met on Wednesday afternoons at the community center, 12 women around a long table with paints and paper and the slightly tentative atmosphere of people who are not sure they are allowed to want this for themselves. Angela arrived for the first session convinced she had forgotten everything. She had not forgotten everything. Some things, it turns out, live deeper than memory, in the hands, in the eye, in the particular quality of attention that art requires, and that she had once possessed and had simply not lost, but set aside. It came back slowly, awkwardly, with the specific embarrassment of a skill relearning itself after a long dormancy. She was not, in those first sessions, good. She was tentative and overworked her edges and mixed her colors wrong in the way of someone who was trying too hard. But she kept going. She went back every Wednesday. And sometime around the 6th session, something released, some combination of memory and muscle and the particular pleasure color on paper. And she made something that surprised her. Not because it was beautiful, though it was in a quiet way, but because she had made it for no one, because it served no purpose, because it was entirely, completely, irreducibly hers. She joined the book group at the library, which met on Thursday evenings and was composed of 8 women ranging in age from 43 to 71. All of them, she would later discover, at some point of transition in their lives, divorce, retirement, children leaving, the particular suspension of a life between one chapter and whatever came next. She did not tell them, at first, about the parking lot, or the mirror, but the question she could not answer in Dr. James's office. She sat and listened and said careful, measured things about the books they read, the way she always had in rooms full of people, presenting the competent, composed version of herself that she had been presenting to the world for 30 years. But over months of Thursdays, something shifted. She began to say true things, small true things at first. An admission that she had felt lost since the children left, a confession that she was not sure what she was doing with herself, a tentative and half-apologetic acknowledgement that she was, at 57, trying to figure out who she actually was. And instead of the polite discomfort she had expected, the reflexive change of subject, the 2 cheerful reassurances, she found something she had not anticipated. She found recognition. She found women who knew exactly what she was talking about. Not everyone was comfortable with Angela's changes. This also needs to be said because the story of a woman reclaiming herself is sometimes told as if it is met with universal support and celebration, and that is not how it tends to work. There were people in Angela's life, people who loved her, people who meant well, who were quietly unsettled by the version of her that was emerging from this process. A woman from the church committee who called to ask why Angela had stepped back from the food drive, with a tone that suggested stepping back was something closer to betrayal than to boundary setting. David, who was not unkind, but who was genuinely puzzled in those early months by the fact that his wife was less available than she had always been, less organized around his needs and comfort, less predictable in her rhythms. The children, who noticed something different in their mother's voice on the phone and were not quite sure whether to be worried or relieved. Angela had spent 30 years being available to everyone, and availability, once established as a pattern, tends to be experienced by the people who benefit from it not as a gift that can be withdrawn, but as a feature of the landscape, permanent, reliable load. She was learning, for the first time in her life, to say no. Not cruelly, not with the anger of a woman who has finally had enough and is making sure everyone knows it, but quietly, steadily, with the particular authority of a person who has decided that their time and energy are finite and that they have some say in how those resources are allocated. She said no to the committee request and felt the familiar pull of guilt and held on until the guilt subsided, which it did eventually. She said no to a family dinner she had been expected to host every month for 20 years and suggested, instead, that they rotate, that all 3 children and their growing families take turns, that the hosting be shared, that the assumption of her permanent domestic availability be gently but clearly revised. She said no to David's expectation, unspoken but long-standing, that she would rearrange her schedule around his plans, and offered instead a conversation about what they each needed and how they might meet in the middle. These were small things. They were also, in the context of her life, enormous. She was learning that a boundary is not an act of aggression. That saying no to one thing is a way of saying yes to something else. That the something else, in her case, was herself. The conversation with David came on a Sunday evening in October, almost a year after the mirror moment. They had been circling it for months, 2 people who were skilled at each other after 3 decades, but who had allowed the skill to substitute for honesty, and who were now, tentatively and with some mutual discomfort, trying to find their way back to the real thing. Angela told him what she had told Dr. James, what she had told the book group, what she had been telling herself for months, that she had spent their marriage giving everything and keeping nothing, that she had loved him and their children to the point of disappearing, that the disappearing had been her doing and her responsibility, but that she needed him to understand what it had cost and to be willing to build something different going forward. He listened. He was quiet for a long time afterward. He looked, when he finally spoke, like a man who was genuinely hearing something that had been in front of him for years and that he had not, until this moment, been paying sufficient attention to. He said that he had not realized. He said he was sorry. He said he wanted to understand better and would try to. It was not a transformation. It was not a sudden and complete reimagining of a 30-year marriage. But it was honest. And in the vocabulary of the life they were building, honest was worth more than almost anything else. Angela's story is not over. It continues every morning she walks before David wakes up, every Wednesday afternoon at the easel, every Thursday evening at the book group. Every day, she chooses herself without apology and without guilt. If her story has stayed with you, if something in it has touched a place you recognize, please share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. You may not know exactly who that person is, but you probably know her. She is the woman who is always there for everyone. The one you call first when something falls apart. The one who never seems to need anything. Share this with her. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, please do that now. There is so much more we want to share with you. Come back for it. Here is what Angela knows now that she did not know on that February morning 2 years ago. She knows that the relationship mistake that quietly destroys many women's futures is not loving too deeply. It is not sacrificing too much, or choosing the wrong man, or staying too long, or any of the external things we typically examine when a woman's life does not look the way she hoped it would. The mistake, the real mistake, the one that operates so quietly and so close to the surface of the virtue that disguises it, is the slow surrender of the self in service of others. It is the gradual, loving, entirely well-intentioned process by which a woman makes herself so available, so organized around the needs of the people she loves, that she loses track of who she is apart from those needs. It is possible to be a magnificent wife and forget you are a person. It is possible to be a devoted mother and stop being self. It is possible to love a community so completely that you give it everything and leave nothing for the woman who is doing the giving. This is not a story about the failure of love. It is a story about what love, without boundaries, without self-preservation, without any corresponding attention to the one who is doing the loving, eventually does to the lover. The people we love are supposed to be part of our lives. They were never meant to become the whole of them. A woman who has a full and living identity of her own, who has interests and friendships and ambitions and pleasures that exist apart from her roles, is not a less devoted wife or mother for having those things. She's a more whole person. And whole people, it turns out, are better at love than hollow ones. They have more to give, and they give it from abundance rather than from depletion. They love with presence rather than performance. They stay because they choose to, not because they have made themselves so thoroughly dependent on being needed that leaving would mean ceasing to exist. This is what Angela is teaching the young women she now mentors at the college near her house. First-generation students, many of them carrying expectations from families and communities that have been telling them, in 1,000 subtle ways, that their needs come last. She tells them, do not disappear into loving. Do not confuse sacrifice with identity. Love well and love generously and love with your whole heart. And keep something back, not because the people you love do not deserve everything. They may, but because you deserve to still be there when they're done needing you. You deserve to still be a person. Angela sits now in a season of life she once feared. Not because everything is resolved. Marriages are long and complicated and always in process, and hers is no different. Not because she has no regrets. She has some, and she's making her peace with them in the way that thoughtful people do, acknowledging them without being consumed by them. But because she has found, at 57, what she should perhaps have known at 22, that she is worth knowing. That the woman in the mirror deserves the same attention, the same care, the same patient interest that she has given to everyone else for 30 years. She painted a small watercolor last week, just for herself, not to show anyone, not for any purpose beyond the making of it. A window, morning light, a kitchen table, the particular quality of silence that can mean loneliness or can mean peace, depending entirely on who you are when you sit down at it. Angela sits down at it, now knowing who she is. The house is quiet, but quiet, she has discovered, is not a problem that needs solving. It is a condition that can be inhabited. It can be the sound of loneliness. Or it can be, if you have done the work, if you have been brave enough to find yourself in the middle of everything you were given away, it could be the sound of a woman, finally, at rest in her own life.